I can't think of anyone more relevant to end this week of conversation with than my friend, comrade, and fellow creator of decolonized thoughts, images, representations than AJ. From the moment I met him and saw the images that he produced, in the words of Jackie Wilson, I was lifted higher.
If you're cast into a universe that is fundamentally anti-Black, which sort of demonizes everything about you, you have a tendency to counter it by flipping things, which is obviously in some ways can be like very emancipatory, but also it has its limits because it's like being trapped in some sort of binary opposition. Music is the one Black American creation that's sort of undeniable. It's the one thing that sort of everybody agrees on, that is great. Not just great, but deep and diverse. It's not just powerful, but it's something that we created, that we own. And owning things is a big deal for us because we were owned. We could have survived the experience of slavery if we were lying to ourselves, So I'm trying to make work less about Black people and make work like Black people. It's not straightforward, In other words, the camera ends up being an instrument that's streaming the white gaze. It's like the camera ends up functioning as a sort of on a psychoanalytical level as a stand-in for the white gaze. And whenever Black people are subjected to the white gaze, there's this whole series of really protective and survival things in terms of what you can and cannot say. So the question was like, how do you get around that? So I thought John Gwaltney's observation was completely bound up in that. It's something about not being seen, freeing Black people up to speak freely. So one of the first things that I decided in this project was that I was never going to point a camera at people when I talked to them.
Born in Tupelo, Mississippi, Arthur Jafa is a legendary filmmaker and visual artist. He is known for his dedication to extracting profound meaning from the association of images. Jafa has worked with other legendary African-American filmmakers throughout his career, such as Julie Dash and her seminal work Daughters of the Dusk, which was his debut as a director of photography, and Spike Lee's personal classic, Crooklyn. Jafa's personal work, however, stands outside of the traditional narrative structures of film. Mentored by another LA Rebellion film movement legend, Haile Gerima, by way of Howard University, Jafa's work takes on vast themes of Blackness, its intimacy with death, life, love, and its survival of and connection with slavery and anti-Blackness. His films, Dreams Are Colder Than Death, which released in 2014, Love is the Message and the Message is Death, which released in 2017, Apex, which released in 2017, and many, many more, loom large as an experimental and daring contentions with the love, terror, and everything in between of Black life that refuse to settle on one positive or negative answer, opting instead to make space for and offer multiplicity and disquiet within Blackness. Since watching Arthur Jafa's 2014 experimental documentary film Dreams Are Colder Than Death in my cinema studies course taught by film and English scholar Michael Gillespie, I have not been able to shake the thoughts, feelings, and ideas that it evoked in my mind. Thoughts that are wrapped up in the film's theme of the ever-expanding modalities of Blackness. My intention with this video essay is to continue what started as an assignment for that course, with the goal of deepening my understanding of the topics and themes presented in the film by cross-examining them and their presentation with Chirstina Sharpe's book In the Wake on Blackness and Being. As a sort of disclaimer, I'd like to reiterate that the point of this video is to explore these themes so that I may deepen my understanding of them as a retrospective for myself primarily, and then of course to foster conversations with you in the process. Dreams is a prolific film with a myriad of complexities that might not completely make it into this video, and that's okay. I can make whole videos examining small portions of this film because it is truly just that vast in its scope when speaking to the Black life world, but I'm not. At least, not right now. In this essay, I seek to examine how, in his film, by way of intentional uses of filmic language and form manipulation, Arthur Jafa participates in Chirstina Sharpe's method of wake work to explore different modes and expressions of Blackness, creating a piece that interrogates the tension between the differing modes while simultaneously honoring and giving voice to the vastness of Black life and death without limitation. Okay, it is currently past 12:30 as I'm editing this, and I realize that I didn't say my name or introduce myself in any way, shape, or form, which is wild for what I'm trying to do. My name is Sage Golden. I'm a writer, filmmaker, uh, photographer, and reader, and I'm extremely passionate about all things pertaining to Blackness and media, specifically when it comes to using Black media to liberate, express, educate, and remember, both within the African diasporic traditions, and within the African American tradition specifically. Still working out the kinks of this channel, as this proves, but I appreciate you all being patient with me. So, without further ado, back to the video and Homie in the Red. Video essays are a new endeavor for me, and I'm excited and honored to have you all on my journey in doing so. I'm still figuring out what I want this channel to be, but I know I plan to dive into all forms of Black media, including film, TV, literature, and music, as well as do retrospectives and really meanderings on other topics in Black studies and the Black experience. My overall goal with this, as of now, is to contribute to the already ongoing conversations with others who love our people and art as I do. So, without further ado, welcome to my channel, and thank you all for your time. There's more to come very, very soon. I have a bunch of ideas I want to work on and that I'm excited to share. But until then, on to the video. We are beyond the frame. Dreams are colder than death, wake work, and the vastness of Black being. Section 1. Doro work and standing in the wake. In the interest of creating a film that reflects upon what it means to be Black in the 21st century, after being approached to create something that reflected on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech, Jafa pinpoints his curiosity and investment in an author talk with scholar Saidiya Hartman when he says, "We, as in Black people in the US, are in the middle of what some people call the golden age, but in my circle, nobody seems happy." Jafa, through the film's form, intentionally orients this reflection in both the afterlife of the March on Washington and the afterlife of slavery, while simultaneously refusing to reproduce an idealized framing and representation of Black life, which is exactly what was initially asked of him by the ZDF. Instead, Jafa steeps himself in a creative practice that seeks out the many differing expressions of Black life in our present society, as commented on by African American scholars and accompanied by gathered images of Black people existing without consequence around the country. What was accomplished then is a poignant meditation on Blackness as an experience, idea, and vast expanse that is intimately tied to and beyond anti-Blackness and the slave trade, shedding light on the kaleidoscopic aspects of Black being, imagination, and love. In doing so, it closely aligns itself with Chirstina Sharpe's idea of wake work, or thinking with care, that is characterized by asking what happens when we proceed into, stand stoutly in, and move through the wake as a we or I, that care and know that we stand on the ground of anti-Blackness and yet still insist on Black being. Chirstina Sharpe is an African American academic whose work spans categories of Black studies, Black queer studies, African American literature, and Black visual studies. She is currently a professor of English literature and Africana studies at York University in Toronto, Canada. Though she has written a handful of eye-opening works, her most seminal work as of yet is In the Wake on Blackness and Being, in which she argues for a method of thinking with care that she refers to as wake work. Wake work is characterized by the acknowledgement of the pervading effects of slavery and its resulting deeply rooted anti-Blackness, and engaging in a mourning of those effects in the past and present, with the goal of honoring Black life and moving through our oppression. On her method of wake work, Sharpe states,
I'm interested in ways of seeing and imagining responses to terror in the varied and various ways that our Black lives are lived under occupation. Ways that attest to the modalities of Black life lived in, as under and despite Black death. And I want to think about what this imagining calls forth to think through what it calls on us to do, think, feel in the wake of slavery.
In the same aforementioned author talk, Jafa identifies to the audience the ministries that he follows in his creative process, referring to them as Doro work and usher work. Usher work is characterized by the creation of platforms for other people to speak and express, and Doro work is described as the act of bringing things together, be it consensual, logical, or not, and creating something new with it. While both are exceedingly interesting and important in the context of dreams, what I'd like to focus on now is the Doro work, specifically in reference to the film's style of liquidity and the gathering of both the related and unrelated image to create meaning and facilitate a deeper understanding of its auditory content. The name Doro is taken from the titular patriarchal figure in Octavia E. Butler's first series of novels, the Patternist series, in which he, as an ancient black spirit with otherworldly powers, spends millennia selectively breeding and killing his own offspring to create new, more powerful beings that have massive effects on the world. Now, aside from my unabashed love of Butler's work, who, as you might be able to tell, is my favorite author, or one of my favorite authors of all time, more videos to come on my GOAT later, I find Jaffa's likening to Doro in this sense extremely powerful and effective. In Dreams, he uses the juxtaposition of images with the words of the scholars being interviewed as a method of moving across the scope of the questions and ideas being posed. While scholar Hortense Spillers discusses the intense intimacy between blackness and death, Jaffa places in a shot of lapping waves of the ocean, evoking what I interpreted as showing the literal wake, as in the track left of the water's surface by a ship, and the constant state of being in the wake of the slave ship that black people are embodied within. This pairing of image and sound illustrates, as Sharpe says, the ways in which our individual lives are always swept up in the wake, produced and determined, though not absolutely, by the afterlives of slavery. The message conveyed is clear already through Spiller's words, but is crystallized into a deeper form of understanding by the pairing of the image with it. Still, though, this expression of blackness being in the shadow of slavery is not all there is to black being, and Jaffa demonstrates this by way of the constant use of images of deep space, seemingly accentuating the other pole of thinking that places blackness as beyond anti blackness and slavery. In reference to this act, film studies and black aesthetics and visual culture scholar Alessandra Reingo describes this act as the repeated association of blackness with images of galaxies in deep space, which instead affirm its life giving force and cosmic reach. Jaffa utilizes this aesthetic of liquidity to continuously reinforce one of the major themes of the film, which is that blackness is far too vast in its scope to be fully explored in any rigidly structured way. It requires liquidity, the Doro work of taking the unrelated and related and splicing them together to create, solidify, and give life to a new or greater understanding. This fervent adherence to liquidity is one of the many ways Jaffa engages in the practice of wake work throughout the film. In its gathered form, the film closely mirrors the words of Chirstina Sharpe. She states, in other words, even as we experienced, recognized, and lived subjection, we did not simply or only live in subjection or as the subjected. Dream's liquidity allows it to move across the vastness of black being and the ideas of Afro pessimism, Afro optimism, wake work, and questions of the black imagination and love with grace, exemplifying the act of thinking and moving with care for blackness in death and in life. Section 2: The Frame, Surveillance, and the White Gaze. Another aspect that aids the film's essential aesthetic of liquidity is Jaffa's intentional auditory disjointing throughout the piece that is sobering in its effect. Consistently preoccupied with the different ways one can capture blackness, be it in motion, sound, image, or otherwise, Jaffa uses this auditory disjointing as a tool to counter the ever expanding surveillance of the black body and elicit the purest responses from his interviewees. This aspect is what you saw him speaking towards in the clip at the beginning. The audio of these moments were purposely recorded separately from the visuals of the speakers, creating a space of freedom to be without the presence of the camera, or in this case, the white gaze. In reference and in admiration to this aspect of the film, Bell Hooks, in a post screening panel of dreams that I recommend everybody watching, gives insight to the relationship between blackness and the surveilling image by saying,
Our bodies cannot speak freely as long as they are under surveillance, as surveillance is the key to colonization. And if you've colonized well, the colonized will surveil for you. Bell Hooks.
in this way, dreams facilitates a reframing of black bodies that positions the speaker beyond the confines of the camera and its gaze, allowing them to move, speak, and exist in a multitude of ways as opposed to the one way of being inside the frame of a camera as I am right now. Through this, Jaffa posits the volatility and violence that has been historically associated with blackness via the camera and its overwhelmingly white gaze, and chooses instead to suspend the conversation of blackness in life and in death in the space of fluidity, imagination, and freedom that echoes the hold of the slave ship metaphor utilized by Frank Wilderson that is referenced by Frank Moulton in his portion of the film. In addition, this act radically goes against these notions of representation that black media centered around the image falls victim to. The repeated use of disjointed auditory content giving life to the various ways of thinking about black being, joined with the images of everyday black people, deep space, and the depths of the ocean, refuses to render blackness in any one way, and certainly not within the pretenses of representing blackness for the gaze of another. Dreams falls in line directly with the arguments made against this interpretation of black film, which call for a more complex way of viewing black art rather than rigid structures in service to representation, which at its core is a form of colonized surveillance done in no small part by the colonized themselves. Michael Gillespie, in his book Film Blackness, deliberately positions himself against this notion of representation when he says,
Accounting for black film in a manner that does not adhere alone to a focus on how cinema must oblige, portend, or emblematize social truth requires attention to cinema as an art practice with attendant and consequential questions of form and politics. The belief in black film's indexical tie to the black life world foregoes a focus on nuance and occults the complexity of black film to interpret, render, incite, and speculate.
the work against the instinct to surveil, to bind within the frame, done by Jaffa in this film, is directly tied to Sharpe's method of wake work through its acknowledgement of the pervading effects of the afterlife of slavery, particularly with the use of the camera and the image. By challenging this tradition with the creation of a new space where black being is free to roam and speak as it pleases, traveling across the breadth of the film leisurely instead of rigidly within the structured frame, Jaffa participates in the practice of being in the wake that Sharpe refers to as the continuous and changing present of slavery's as of yet unresolved unfolding, affirming Sharpe's method of treating black being in the wake as a form of consciousness. Section 3, A Knowing. Throughout the film, especially in the beginning and the end, heard the voices of Hortense Spillers and Frank Moulton, respectively. Blackness's intense intimacy with death and love is discussed with care, reverence, passion, and a sustained acceptance. This intimacy is talked about in a myriad of ways, but chiefly through what is presented as a universal experience in all modes of black being, a knowing. Looming like a shadow of the shadow, death and blackness are treated almost as a pair engaged in an internal chase, with one always winning over the other. For this portion, I like to focus keenly on Hortense Spiller's contributions to the film and how Jaffa utilizes them. Underscored by a recording of Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, the film begins with Hortense Spillers making plain the bitter hopelessness that was black being during slavery and its violence. She says repeatedly, "We didn't have a prayer," and it is paired with images of lynchings, all while Dr. King sings in the black oratory tradition, I Have a Dream. This juxtaposition of King dreaming of an integrated U.S., with Spiller stating how she knows we will lose the gift of black culture if we continue to buy into the Western civilization, is Jaffa communicating the complex dichotomy of black being in the United States and its sobering relationship with death in the physical, cultural, and spiritual sense. The film continues with Spiller speaking on the existence of a flesh memory embedded in black people by way of slavery, while more images of lynched, whipped, and burned black bodies crawl across the screen. She describes this flesh memory as a form of empathy that is embedded in our flesh. This empathy, this form of remembering, is felt in a phantom space, returning when exposed to what used to be there. Jafa's use of the infamous picture Peter, the enslaved African whose whip scars were first captured by photograph, along with the images of other horrific acts, are a method of remembering and triggering that phantom, emphatic flesh memory in the audience. This act demonstrates an aspect of being in the wake that most are familiar with, and that Sharpe characterizes as a place where the past that is not past reappears, always to rupture the present. In another moment, Spiller speaks on her knowledge of how she will soon lose everything she loves to death, including herself, while speaking to the multiple deaths in her family and how they affected her on such a deep level. She says about her sister's death, "My sister died because she grieved for her child." And she continues, "Now I know that dying is real. It is non negotiable, and I'm going to lose some more people." This anecdote about the profound grief that is wound up in the Black experience, wound up in a knowing and often stubborn acceptance of death, is joined by a close up shot of Spiller staring straight into the eye of the camera, demonstrating what is a visual example of the absoluteness of this intimacy that Spillers in the film speak of. Spiller's unshakable presence in the frame, her immutable gaze, is as sure as the knowledge of the coming of death. Directly after this haunting account of the constant bouts with grief, death, and the knowledge of its ever present place, the recording of Dr. King's speech returns, underscoring images of white supremacist violence and King himself, along with Bayard Rustin and James Baldwin, who both aided in the execution of the March on Washington. These images, overlaid atop the film's somber score, are followed by the words of Frank Moulton, where he questions the statement that black people are just an effect of slavery, and reformats the question as, can black people be loved? His thinking is paired with images of common black people living, existing, and loving. Moulton continues by affirming that blackness is an effect of horror and instead survives it and therefore can be loved, defended, and nurtured. He places a period on this affirmation by saying, in a similar way to Spiller's comments at the beginning of the film, "I know that these things are true," returning again to the knowing. Moulton characterizes this knowing as under the rubric of faith, knowing as feeling and thinking as feeling. It is these thoughts that not only end the film, but also answer the questions posed at the beginning of it. Through Moulton's words, and in an almost direct contrast to Spiller's words throughout the piece, with both their contributions acting as what seems to me voices of the Afro-optimist and Afro-pessimist poles of thought, the film lands on blackness as a vast, ever-thinking, and irreducible state of being. The film, then, ends with Dr. King ironically stating his famous "Let Freedom Ring," leaving the audience with the image of the sun and Hortense Spillers laughing as the final images of the piece. The knowing, in this sense, that blackness can be loved, that it is irreducible, it must be nurtured and defended, is a feeling that is rooted in the act of remaining in the hold of the ship, where the radical imagination, thinking, and feeling, in the context of it or of how it's done now, found its origin. This action of remembrance, when paired with the liquidity of image, sound, and filmmaking form, is precisely the act of standing in the wake that Chirstina Sharpe refers to, and the act of remaining in the hold of the ship that Frank Wilderson refers to. Jafa's version of this utilizes a mixture of the sounds of beating African drums, historical pictures of the civil rights and black power movements, images of violence from slavery and Jim Crow, the stillness of space, crashing waves, and is punctuated subtly by King's "I Have a Dream" speech and the insights of the academic specialists that he interviews, ultimately producing a personalized method of wake work. A wake work that culminates in a searing, heavy, and suspending art piece, which delivers a poignant meditation on the current state of blackness, what it means, and how, above all, it is formidable and both full of and worthy of love. Originally approached by the ZDF to create a reflection on the I Have a Dream speech and where Black people and Black Americans were after it, Arthur Jaffa instead creates a film that reflects, questions, mourns, and affirms Black being and the Black life world in a way that leaves a lasting impact on its viewer. Dreams Are Colder Than Death is a film that chooses to stand in the wake of the brutality, grotesqueness, and heavy afterlife of slavery and interrogate the experience of life, death, and being in Blackness that has survived it. It doesn't interest itself with any kind of representation or positive ideal about the state of Black life. It is honest in its interrogation, and it mourns the past, present, and future of Blackness in the process. In her book, In the Wake of Blackness and Being, Chirstina Sharpe suggests that the way in which Black people contend with their constant state of mourning, this ever present battle with death and the purveyors of the afterlife of slavery, is to continue to participate in a radically insistent wake work that challenges the notions we live within so that we may continue to move forward, understand, and overcome them. In no small effort and in no small way, I believe Arthur Jaffa does exactly that and then some with this film. In tradition with the wake work that came before it, be it film, literature, or what have you, Dreams mourns, questions, lifts, and illuminates the beauty, terror, and life and love of Black being. There is so much more in this film that I'd love to talk about. This video is already way too long. So if you've made it this far, and if you take away anything from this, let it be this. Dreams Are Colder Than Death is an essential art piece to understanding Blackness, and it is a triumph in the decolonial thinking and creation. A piece that proves to be more relevant now than ever before, and one that will undoubtedly stand the test of time. Wake work challenges us as a people to figure out how, in every waking moment, we are moving towards liberation and thinking in everything we do, be it art or the mundaneness of life, with care for each other, Blackness, and our future. Jaffa has found his version of wake work within his storied career of films, as have a great many others that we know and love in their respective art forms. Now, the question remains, what is your version, and what are you going to do with it?